And without further ado, I welcome George, Monica, Josh, Johnny, and John to discuss the true cost of college.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it is a real pleasure to be here today. First of all, I want to congratulate Brad and the entire team that he's put together in the short time that they've been part of the San Diego community. They have done amazing things. Just take a look at this room today, and you'll know what I'm talking about. Do I need to hold this, or you just want me to use that?
No, you're good.
Use this? Okay. So, it's great. And getting to know Brad has been a real special treat for me. There are very few people in San Diego County that could convince me to not do my regular Friday afternoon golf game and be here today. And Brad's one of the few, buddy. So keep up the good work. Keep up the good work. What you will learn is that tuition is the tip of the iceberg when it comes to college expenses. It's the tip of the iceberg. It's that pizza that you order 3 times a day. And all those other charges that you put on your parents' credit card that really are the most terrible expenses. And you have to learn how to really learn to live on a budget and all the other things that are involved. You're going to hear from some people up here that are going to steer you in the right direction and give you a truckload of information. And when you leave this room today, you're going to be much better prepared to make smart decisions. So let me get going. We got some great people up here, and we're going to take as much time as necessary. I didn't mention this. My Josh, you'll appreciate this. My son did graduate from San Diego State University. After 2 years. He went to Palomar College for 2 years, and then. So Josh, talk a little bit about the best way to maximize those benefits I was just talking about, those military and veteran education benefits.
Well, I mean, really the best way to go about that, first and foremost, you have to find out what you qualify for, what's available to you. I mean, if you don't know that it's available, you're not going to be able to use it. When I started going to school, it was probably late 2006. Didn't really have an idea of what was out there. I was still using Chapter 30 at the time, but really kind of figured at some point I'm going to need to transfer, to a 4-year university. And how am I going to make that work for me? How am I going to pay for that? And so to take a look at how does Chapter 30 work? What can I pay for with that? What can't I? How does post 9/11 work? Chapter 33. How do scholarships work? In conjunction with that. At the time I didn't know about Chapter 31 because there was probably a handful of people that do vocational rehab. Vocational rehab pays for a lot of different stuff. And if you can qualify for that and that's going to work for you, then that's a huge savings that you can pocket when you take a look at what do you want to do, where do you want to go, and how do you want to get there. When I start looking at some of the students that I've gone to school with or the students that I work with, a lot of them didn't have that direction to start with. There's a lot of people that run out of GI Bill halfway through, partway through, whatever it might be, and they get stuck in a position where they can't finish. Whether it's, they're single, have families, whatever it might be, they're unable to finish. There's a friend of mine that's out in Arkansas, went to the university out there. He's 1 semester short, but he's got a wife and a couple kids. He's got to work. He's 1 semester away from finishing that degree and just can't figure out how he's going to make that work for him. And it's a real tragedy when you've got that kind of benefit there, staring you straight in the face, but taking the time to plan ahead. It's kind of the common saying, people don't plan to fail, they fail to plan, and that's exactly what happens. Unless you know what you qualify for, you're not able to overlap those benefits and to use those effectively. One of the bigger things I've been seeing now, we get a lot of students that are interested. I talked to a sailor actually the other day, asked him when he gets out. 2019. So he must have just hit the fleet, and he's already looking at how do I make this a reality, and I wish I would use tuition assistance when I was in to at least knock the general education stuff out of the way, because the more you can do that up front, the more you can use those benefits to knock that out. That saves your GI Bill money on the back end of things. I'm seeing more students that are able to do exactly that and then use those remaining benefits to go on to master's degrees. And in certain industries, bachelor's degrees aren't going to carry you anymore. The market's saturated, and it gets to be where the bachelor's is yesterday's high school diploma. Certain industries you have to have that master's to really even do anything. State likes to put it out there that, oh, we graduated 9,000 some people with a BA in psych. Nobody's going to do anything with a BA in psych. It's reality. You can't do anything with that. You have to go on to higher levels. I have a BA in economics myself. You can't really do anything with that economics degree unless you go on. And unless you have a way to pay for that, you're going to be stuck between that rock and a hard spot.
Monica, let's talk a little bit about choosing a school. I learned, again, I mentioned my daughter went to a very expensive school for 2 years. And while it did a lot of good things to her, I think there were other ways we could have done that. So picking a school is a real important consideration, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's really one of the most effective ways for you to be able to cut the cost of college down. Your school choice is really the first and most influential point that you're going to make in that process. Recognize that sticker price is not your final price. So when you're shopping for a car, you're always looking and saying, okay, well, what's my sticker price going to be? But then after you've talked back and forth and you've dickered and you've bargained and done all this stuff, you pay a totally different price. And that's the same thing with schools. Private schools have more money than public schools do. So remember that most people look only in California in their current region, wherever it is that they live. California's got great schools and their public schools are amazing, but the graduation rate is lower than with many of the private schools, and in terms of the amount of time that it takes to graduate, it takes you longer. So 5.6 years graduating from a public school versus 4.2 years graduating from private school. So that's one thing. When you're choosing the schools that are private, they have more money to give because they have foundations, they're in control of their budgets, they can plan their finances, and so they can give more money to you. So that's number one. Two, choosing a school that actually provides for more of your financial need. And I would say the minimum of your financial need that you want covered is at least 70%. And you can find that information online at collegeboard.org. It's online, it's totally available. And then finally, a school that graduates its students. So if you go on to collegeboard.org and check that out, it's reported that how many of the students that they actually graduate within a 6-year period. It's mandated by law that all schools report that on their websites. But if you go and check it out, some of these public schools, they don't even graduate half of their students after 6 years. So if you were to choose a school that graduates 75 or 80% of their students within a 6-year period, then you're better off because it's a school that graduates rather than just a school that educates.
Well put. You know, I've heard it said, and I know schools are interesting, Monica, because it's sort of like an airplane. An airline gets no revenue from an empty seat.
Right.
And schools kind of have to approach it almost from that perspective as well. And that's where that negotiation part comes in, right?
That's right. Planning is so important because if you choose a school where your student is within the first 5 to 25% of the matriculating class, they're much more likely to get money. So if you approach it as a business transaction, this is a business, friends, right? I mean, they're making $20,000, $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 per year for your students. So if you approach it as a business, as they do, then you're better off because you'll make better choices. The emotional decision gets you in the back seat, whereas the consideration of, okay, I'm making a deal here. How can I get the best deal? You'll do much better. Find your coupons.
So, John, let's talk a little bit about student loan debt. I'm sure most people have seen the headlines. It's now $1 trillion plus, more than credit card debt in this country. And there are different types of loan programs. You've got the federal student loan programs, private student loans. Talk about the difference and the impact they have.
Sure. The difference in the impact is substantial. I think student loans in this country are getting to epidemic proportions. About 15 years ago, I would say that the credit card industry was probably one of the biggest problems facing young adults and adults in general. Now that focus is shifting over to the student loan industry. Typically, students are funding their education with two types of loans. One is a government, federal-based student loan, and the other is either through private loans. The key difference is substantial, actually. The federal loans are typically what you hear about in the Stafford loans. A lot of them are either subsidized or unsubsidized, and they're backed by the U.S. government. My company in particular spends a lot of time working with those students. We're consolidating their student loans. We're finding programs that fit their needs. And there's a lot of programs offered by the government and the Department of Education that address hardships that people are having in repaying these loans. When you talk about the epidemic proportions, what's happening is what we're seeing is a lot of students are graduating. There's no jobs. They're ending back in the house. And financially, they're behind the 8 ball. They're carrying, on average, we see about a $40,000 debt load come through, and that's a big loan amount to start life with. And the impact to the economy is talked about a lot, because now instead of allocating your resources and your funds that you're earning to the economy, it's going to the interest and to the student loan debt. So that's on the federal side. On the private side, that's offered by financial institutions, or credit unions, banks. There's a number of financial institutions that are willing to give you money. If you qualify for it, you have a good credit score, a lot of times they're going to ask your parents to co-sign for that. Once again, a trap that could be detrimental. When you graduate, you can't find a job, you can't repay your loans, now your parents are on the hook. So there's a lot of distress out there in the financial world in regards to repaying this student loan. Luckily, on the federal side, the Department of Education does offer the programs I've mentioned, and to qualify for those programs, it's based on a number of factors, but a lot of it are income-based programs. Can't find a job, they're going to give you assistance in helping you repay those loans, or at least get into a program where it's going to be manageable and you can afford the standard of living to be able to function, the necessities in life. On the private side, there's not too much help out there, to be honest. There's programs that are developing. Most people have an option of trying to consolidate or to get a loan, borrow from a family member. But if you end up in a situation where you can't afford this stuff, it's just like debt, and it goes into a collection process, and it gets pretty nasty. And we'll talk, I think, a little bit more about what can happen on the downside.
John, it really does seem to me the federal government wants to kind of be the be-all, end-all of educational loans.
Yeah, and it's actually, quite frankly, if you're going to take loans, I think the federal government offers the best choice. Taking a loan from a private institution, there's differences in how they work, and I think the federal side is a good option. Ideally, you don't take loans at all. You save beforehand, but that's not reality, unfortunately.
It can be. Johnny, let's talk a little bit about post 9/11 VA benefits and how they might have an impact on the ability to receive loans and grants. And I'm glad you mentioned that word grants in there. So talk a little bit more about that.
Sure, absolutely. Actually, I was thinking about what Josh had mentioned earlier, where he came into a college and, like he mentioned first, he started using all his VA benefits, his GI Bill, his Chapter 30 rehab, voc rehab, and so on and so forth. What a lot of students don't realize is that they can still apply for the FAFSA and maybe use the government's money first. Use the Pell Grants, use the Supplemental Education Opportunity Grant. Especially like at schools at National, the difference between tuition for our military students and the grants is less than $100 a course. So that's something that a lot of students don't realize, and I tell them, save your funding, save your GI Bill, save your VA benefits for your graduate program. Graduate programs, they don't offer much in free money. So we always want to advise them, take advantage of the Pell Grants. If you're a California resident, the Cal Grants, so on and so forth. So it doesn't necessarily negatively affect your eligibility. It's actually a positive, because the goal of an advisor is to make sure that you're not borrowing. You're not overborrowing funding, especially if you have several means of resources, whether it is VA benefits, whether it is federal grants. We want you to use those first and foremost before we touch the loans. Now, that's where it can possibly negatively affect the loans, because we don't fund you past your budget. We take tuition into consideration. We take cost of living into consideration. We take school supplies, living expenses, so on and so forth. But at some point, you do reach a maximum. Say your budget for a year is $20,000. If you have $15,000 in grants and VA benefits, we're not going to let you borrow an additional $10,000 in loans. There's no need. There's no need now that tuition's covered, living expenses are covered, and you have what you need to go to class. So that's why I say, if anything, try to use your grants first and foremost, because those grants will run out when you finish and you get your bachelor's degree. And like you guys mentioned, eventually you're going to need your graduate degree. The bachelor's is a good starting point, a good foundation to show that you've studied your core requirements, but that you ultimately want to get into a specific graduate professional career. So you do want to save as much as you can of if you have military benefits, save it. Save it until you actually really, really do need it, because right now, especially with a lot of people don't understand that, if you do the FAFSA, they think that it's only for the poor. It's not necessarily for the poor. It's for anyone. It's for anyone that's interested to see what they're possibly eligible for. There are several types of grants. There are grants for California residents, so on and so forth. So always try to take advantage of your grant money first and foremost, so that we don't have to worry about the private loans, the the federal loans and the repayment options, and having to figure out how to pay those off in the future.
You know, it's really great that National University has people like Johnny on staff that can provide that counseling and cover those bases that most of us on our own would never even think about. But the ability to provide that counseling is absolutely important. I know that all the other schools in the region, especially the community colleges, really do a great job counseling, because for a lot of the people coming out of the military, the community college is their first stop. And that's great, and that's really, really great. Monica, let's talk a little bit about these student loans, and they are going to have an impact on your financial life in other ways, your retirement, your ability to qualify for a home loan, and other things like that. What should people know?
Well, first of all, what's happening with parents, on the parents' side, they're dipping into their retirement savings in order to pay for school, right? They're taking out that money, which could be sitting and continually growing compound interest, and they're sacrificing that gift to be able to pay their loans or pay for school. So on the parents' side, that's the first thing that's really a huge impact on the financial future for the entire family. But on the student side, what they're doing is they're taking on loans also, and once they do that, they're starting already into this habit building of I'll take debt first and then repay later. And it's a problem because as it is that we grow older, financial pressures continue to grow. You have kids, you try to get a home loan, and you've got one extra loan that you have to pay off on a regular basis. You take on credit card debt, and the debt continues to pile. Rather than putting yourself into a position where you're in a place of power, where you have savings first that you dip into in order to pay for the things that are important to you. So students finally, they're saving later. So they're starting to put aside money later, and it takes them longer to be able to afford a home, to be able to put down a down payment, to buy a car and get the best rates, to be able to do all of the things that we use money for. They start in a weaker position by having more student loans. It's just a debt, it's a problem. And so if the more that they can do on the front end to plan, to take those coupons and put them into place so that maybe you could even go to school without taking any loans. What a miraculous experience that could be, right?
Indeed,
Yes.
Absolutely true. John, let's talk a little bit about, there are so many rumors about student loans and stuff like that, but let's talk about one that I think is kind of interesting, and that's the what happens to a student loan if you file for bankruptcy.
Sure. I started down that path earlier, and I knew that this topic would come up. Unfortunately, in most cases, bankruptcy is not an option. You find yourself in a hardship position, and the courts are not granting, including the student loans in bankruptcy. So therein lies the problem. And what happens after that actually gets quite ugly. It's like any other debt that you can't bankrupt out of. Is if you find yourself in that hardship position, you don't have the income to meet the general payments, you go into that collections process. The collections process is, it's a pretty grueling process if anybody's ever been through it. And after that, there could be wage garnishments. So it's this downward spiral, not even bringing into account some of the stuff that Monica mentioned. Now you're just going down a tube, and there's no relief in sight. And that's the way it exists today. I don't want to say it never happens. There have been bankruptcy cases that have been included, or student loans that have been included in bankruptcy cases, but it's extreme hardship to qualify. And for the most part, we tell a lot of our clients that it's really not an option, because a lot of times what the bankruptcy attorneys have told us is it's too expensive to actually, for a lot of bankruptcy lawyers won't even take it on because it's too expensive for them to even challenge the student loan process. So they just leave them out, and the students find themselves in kind of a really, really bad position at that point.
Not a good situation. Johnny, let's talk a little bit about something that Josh mentioned a little while ago, and that's for a lot of people, once they get that college education, to really make it become beneficial to them, they have to take it to the next level, get that master's degree, go into a graduate's program. And so that brings with it all kinds of other things. Are there financial aid programs possible for that level of education?
Unfortunately not. The most graduate students are stuck with federal loans. That's basically what the option is from the Department of Education right now. The only program that does have some grant eligibility is a teaching program. But that's, even that grant isn't much more than about $8,000 for the entire program, which would be 2 years worth. So it's not that much funding, which is why we encourage undergraduates to save their funding. Save all your funding you have. If you have the GI Bill, save it. If you have any kind of other VA benefits, save it. Save it because, we don't encourage students to overborrow because as a university, we're trying to keep our default rate low, which is why we keep it under around 5% or less. We don't want you to borrow money that you can't pay back because it doesn't benefit you or the university. It makes the university look bad because we're putting you in a situation to fail. We don't want to put you in a situation to fail. It makes everyone all around look bad. It makes your life difficult. As John was mentioning, you can't get rid of these loans. You can't get rid of them. You can't pretend that you never borrowed it. At some point they're going to come due. If students do need student loans, we try to focus on what is actually needed. What is the bare minimum that you need to cover tuition? What is the bare minimum that you need to buy your books? Is a book something that you can budget out of your personal income? Is that something that you could think about and actually focus on early on and figure out how you're going to pay that off without having to borrow this extra funding? It's nice that they offer you a lot of extra funding, but it's not needed. It's not needed. You don't need to borrow it. You don't need to take it. I've even advised students that are in the undergraduate program, if you have a full Cal grant and you have a full Pell grant and you have additional grants that are being offered to you in scholarships, save it. Put it in a savings account. Put that money away. If you didn't use it all, put it away. If you don't need it all, put it away because that's money that you can have in an account that ultimately when you do enter your graduate program, you have something to help you out, even if it's half, even if it's something just to help you out so that way you're not putting yourself in a situation where you're borrowing federal loans that put you in a financial bind or in a situation where you understand that you have to get into some kind of repayment program because you're not going to be able to pay it off.
All right, let's talk a little bit with Josh here about higher education for members of the military and veterans as well. I know that for a region like San Diego County, where we have such a high military population and so many military active duty here, that this is something that they're looking at. And why do you think it's so important?
I mean, the importance is sort of twofold on that. I mean, for the vast majority of service members, one, it's a benefit earned. And so not using it's literally leaving money on the table. I mean, and depending on where you go, what that's going to pay, I mean, that can vary, in the range of literally tens of thousands of dollars of what that benefit is worth in the near term versus, even what that translates to then long term throughout your lifetime, what that becomes as far as income level. Second, most industries require at least a bachelor's degree these days. Like Johnny said, that's the foundation. Perhaps you need a master's, a doctorate, whatever it is that you're going to go on to, but really that's kind of where it starts. And so for a lot of military members, of course, having the experience, whether it's technical experience in a rate or an MOS, whether it's the HR kind of stuff, the personnel, the management, that whole kind of package that you put together. In a lot of places, hey, that looks great. Where's your degree? That looks great, but I need you to have this. And so it's really important to be able to back that kind of stuff up. I do a lot of work with engineering students. There's a lot of companies in town that value the experience, especially when a lot of them, their end client is a DOD, U.S. Navy, Marine Corps, Army, you name it. Hey, that's great that you understand that. Hey, you were an avionics tech. Awesome. I need you to have a degree to be able to bump you to that next level. Somebody like Northrop, they can put you in as an engineering technician, but you're going to stay at that technician level and you won't be promoted to a full-fledged engineer without that STEM degree. And it works like that in a lot of professions. You can get in as some sort of an assistant, some sort of lower level, entry level type work, but to break through that and to make it that next level, you have to have that degree. And it continues on from there. The bachelor's, again, in a lot of industries isn't going to be what gets you to the top. That'll break you through for maybe that first ceiling, but at some point you're going to want to be able to move on from that. And veterans bring a lot to the table. Often don't always realize it, and a lot of times it's not necessarily technical skills. It's the idea that, hey, I can trust you to show up on time. Hey, I can trust you to give you a job and get out of your way and let you get it done. Yep. But at the same time, I need to see some sort of an academic background in that can legitimize that experience as well.
One of the great tragedies, and I know there's a lot of people that are looking at a way to do this, but you take a look at the young men and women who come out of the military that have received hundreds of thousands of dollars in training and have skills that are unbelievable, but yet we haven't found a way to translate that into an equivalent college credit. And if we can ever get that done, it's going to speed up the process, keep a lot of those costs down really significantly. And I hope that works out sometime in the not too distant future. Hey, Johnny, I know the military and the educational world like to abbreviate things and use initials for stuff, and I don't understand half of them, so I'm probably even saying this one. So talk a little bit about something I'm going to call FAFSA, okay? Tell us what it is, deadlines, and the information people need.
Sure. As you know that the acronym, it's FAFSA. It's the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. Now, please keep in mind that the keywords are free. You don't have to pay to complete this application. So if you go to fill out the application, go to FAFSA.gov, not .com. .com will try to charge you $60 to complete the free application for federal student aid, which is not right. It's pretty simple. It's a pretty simple application to complete. Now, the application is active from July 1st to June 30th, which is their fiscal year. Now, it means it's active, but it's available 6 months before, as of January 1st. They make the application available because there's priority application periods. Between January 1st and March 2nd, that's the priority application period to make sure that you apply for all grants. Cal Grant, Pell Grant, SEOG, Perkins, anything that you can possibly get is before March 2nd. After March 2nd, some of the grants that are taken up by the people that submitted beforehand start to disappear. The only grants that are available year-round is generally just the Pell Grant. So if you fill out the application late, you can still possibly get the Pell Grant, but as for the other grants that I mentioned, you may have missed the deadline. It doesn't mean that you never get them in your life. It just means that next year you need to make sure that you're on top of it. I generally tell students, try to make sure you do your taxes before March 2nd because it's very important. They're going to ask you tax information. They're going to want to know your family size. They're going to want to know the school that you're thinking about attending, so on and so forth. So if anything, try to have your taxes done before March 2nd. It'll make sure that your application is complete, and they're not assuming that the income you submitted on there is true or not. They want to make sure that the income is correct, you are a student in need, and that they're going to offer you what you are absolutely eligible for. So that's what the FAFSA is for.
All right, we're a little tight on time. Brad says that if I run late, this microphone will explode in my hand, so I don't want that to happen. So let's go through the rest of the questions kind of quick, if we could. Josh, let's talk a little bit again, and I know there are a tremendous number of resources out there, so where would you suggest people go?
I mean, to look for where you can find out what you qualify for. I mean, it's sort of a multidimensional process. First of all, an internet search can be pretty helpful when you look at some of that kind of stuff. When you look at some of the veteran service organizations in town, whether it's someone like IAVA, VFW, American Legion, I know STEP's putting on the Camis to College here coming up in August. That'll be a great resource. It'll kind of get everybody all in one spot. Talk to the veteran centers at the prospective institutions you're looking at. They can be a great resource to find out not only external scholarships, but what's available internally within that system. I know, let's say, for instance, at San Diego State, the community colleges, they offer their own scholarships that are right there. They're based out of that institution. As far as the federal stuff, you look at the va.gov website, look for the GI Bill website, that'll provide information. And don't forget about the state. Whatever state you're going to, different states offer different benefits. They vary in what they're worth, they vary in what value they provide, but it's something to consider.
Good stuff. Monica, let's talk about something that I think we've all been skirting around here, but can you go to college without going deeply into debt?
This man's your poster child. Absolutely. So, really, you have to remember in the back of your mind, graduating without debt is attainable. That's your mantra. Graduating without debt is attainable. I'm glad I got the empowerment question. But yes, it's definitely possible. In fact, if you start saving $200 a month from birth through 18 years, you'll have $123,000 if you gain 10% a year. So that pays for 4 years of a college education, right? So saving your way into paying for college is a possible option. Second, graduating in 4 years versus graduating 5.6 years could save you $25,000 to $40,000 or $70,000, right? Third, taking AP classes that will actually apply to your prerequisite classes. That's another way to cut your bill because then you won't have to take them in college. You can take community college classes, coming here to National or any of the other community colleges around, to take the prerequisites that apply and just make sure that those classes are going to transfer. But you can do those during your breaks, your summer breaks or your winter breaks. And finally, making sure that through the application process, you do the best that you can. So if you take your SATs, take them more than once so that you can collect the best scores from each attempt. Take the prep tests for the SATs and all of the preparatory courses that you can take so that you can do the best that you can, since those are one of the main factors that they look at aside from your grades. And also your essay writing. You can take advantage. There's tons of essay writing assistants and groups that help you to improve your essays so that in your applications process, you portray yourself the best that you can so that you're considered and you obtain as many scholarships and grants that are available to you. Spend your time learning about the process sooner rather than later so that you have the opportunity to gain as much knowledge and actually do what needs to be done to gain the money and put it together. Like I say, this man's the genius when it's done because he actually did it. So he's not the only person, and there are many others that are like him.
That's awesome. Way to go. That's really good stuff. John, let's kind of finish off here with a couple of terms that I'm not sure I want either of them to ever happen to any of the people here, but there is a difference between forbearance and deferment. Explain that.
The key difference between deferment and forbearance is simple. Both are a way for you to postpone or delay paying back your student loans. Financial hardship is normally the reason. I know deferment is offered on when students first graduate. There's kind of that grace period, let you get out into the workforce, find a job, and then they're going to come looking for that payment. The key difference between the two is forbearance is normally applied for and it's need-based. It's normally through the government or federal loan programs that offer the forbearance option. And the problem with it is that it really depends on if your loans are subsidized versus unsubsidized of how the impact's going to be, because in the forbearance situation, typically the interest rate is running. You have two options at that point. You can either make the payment on the interest, which is going to be just interest only, so your principal balance is going to stay the same, or in some rare cases, if your hardship is great enough, you're going to be able to defer basically paying or put into forbearance, and that interest rate is accumulating, and then you're paying interest rate on interest rate. It's a negative compounding effect. So typically I'm sure Monica would agree that getting into these deferment and forbearance programs are negative if you find yourself in a situation when you graduate that you have student loan debt.
All right, Brad says we got time for just real quick a couple of questions from the audience. So I'll just watch the hands that go up first, and we'll take that one down there. Just shout it out.
Yeah, can you debunk some of the myth about saving for college for kids and becoming a California veteran?
Question is about the myths of saving for college and programs for the children of veterans.
Yeah, they call it CalVet or something.
CalVet, okay. Anybody want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, I won't do much for the debunking the myths part, but CalVet fee waiver, that's something that works through the county, and that'll depend on what institution you're looking at. So the CalVet fee waiver will cover the fees at public universities in the state of California. So when you're looking at something like San Diego State, UC San Diego, something like that, I'm not sure exactly how that works on the UC side. At state, through the CSU system, each individual campus has their own campus-based fees. So that CalVet fee waiver will cover the basic tuition coming up this fall. That runs about $3,500. Somebody that's going under the CalVet fee waiver is going to pay $752 for that semester in school.
So the keyword is state.
Right. So CalVet's a state benefit, and that only covers anything in the state of California. But it's actually a county program that over here on Overland at the county center over there, that's where you would actually get that certificate, bring that into the financial aid office at the school.
Great stuff. And as far as the thing is, as Monica said, start as early as you possibly can. If you've got grandparents, if you got anybody that makes regular gifts to your children, say, hey, thanks a lot, but the kid doesn't need any more toys. Let's start putting some money away, okay? And there's a number of different tools that Monica can explain for doing that. There are different types of programs that have tax consequences and things like that are beneficial. So, explore all of that and get it going. It's amazing how beneficial it can be. We have time for one more? Anybody? Anyway. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you talk a little bit about 529 plans.
Good, Monica. That's Monica.
Okay, that's me. So 529 plans are plans that you can put money away in, and all of the gains that you get from them are applicable to you, and you don't pay taxes on them. So it's a total thumbs up. In the real world, you'd have to pay tax on that. What you use your 529 plans for is any college-related expenses that are qualified. So that's your big word in the 529 world, is that the expenses have to be qualified. for the 3 times a day pizza that George was talking about
Ain't gonna
before.
work.
That's not part of the plan. But they're talking about tuition, room and board, and those types of expenses. So they're beneficial to start with. In California, the 529 plans are just savings plans. In other states, they also include what they call tuition waivers. But they're very beneficial to have. Parents can put into them, grandparents can put into them. They can be shifted from one student to the next if it turns out that your student decides to, like George's daughter did, become an entrepreneur and become a rock star that way. So it is possible to transfer those funds if it turns out that that's not something that you can use otherwise. But yeah, definitely something that you should take advantage of for sure.
Let me throw one other wrinkle in there. There's another type of education savings account called a Coverdale account, which I really love Coverdale accounts because they're very similar. The money grows tax deferred, and if used for education, can be tax free, and it's Cover, CEVERDELL. Thing about a Coverdale is it's not just for college education. It can be used to pay for other educational costs that come up along the way that are much more. It's expanded a lot more. You can use it for parochial, high school, or fee, tuition and stuff like that. And it allows you to use some of the monies for equipment and things like that. So it has a much smaller contribution level. So that's probably the only negative. But I think they are very compatible and worth looking into. Listen, these people gave you a truckload of information. I'm sure they'll stick around afterwards if you have any questions. But give them a big round of applause.